What's up, everybody? This is a Painfreeperformance Podcast. We have our first guest interview today. We have Paul Spada, head strength and conditioning coach at the University of Bridgeport. What's up, Paul?
How's it going, Pete and Drew? Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure. So why don't we start by just telling us a little bit about your path, how you got into strength and conditioning, your athletics background, how you started in this field.
Yeah, so I am Connecticut born and raised. I grew up in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, and played my first organized athletics as a freshman in high school. And right away, I kind of gravitated towards athletics and strength and conditioning from a 10,000-foot view, if that makes sense, because we didn't have a strength and conditioning coach or anything like that. So progressed through the high school ranks, was a two-time captain of the varsity team junior and senior year, and was fortunate enough to go on to receive a full scholarship to play at Central Connecticut State. And
what sport, Paul?
Football.
Okay.
Football. So was a 4-year starter at Central. Ended up rupturing a disc going into my junior season of football and had to rehab that. And all the doctors said that I wouldn't be playing football anymore. And, basically the storybook ending of, perseverance through that. So managed to finish up my career. Was fortunate enough to receive an internship with Louisiana State University, primarily with their football team, but also assisted with a few other sports like women's soccer and beach volleyball. At the conclusion of that internship, which was awesome, we can talk more about that later, went on to intern again with Yale. And then at the conclusion of that internship, received a graduate assistantship at the University of New Haven, where I worked with their strength and conditioning department, working towards my master's degree. So finished up with my master's degree in sport management, and then went on to get an assistant position at Wofford College, which is in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And that's actually, fun fact, the smallest Division I school in the country. So I guess that's pretty cool. And then at the conclusion of that, obviously COVID hit. I decided it was best for me to leave, head home. And, at that point, I had a little bit of an identity crisis because athletics was kind of shut down for a little bit. So I was looking in different directions for potential career fields to follow, and nothing gave me the same sense of accomplishment and drive like working in college athletics. So I continued to stay the course, kind of behind the scenes, wasn't really putting out any content, wasn't really reaching out to a ton of people, but still kept my foot in the door with reading and research. And when the opportunity presented itself at a school in Connecticut, University of Bridgeport, I had to jump on it because I said to myself, this is a potential opportunity that I may never have again. And I could potentially stay here for the next 20 or 30 years and spend my entire career working here. Because we all know athletics is not a stable career field, especially the higher levels you go up, Division I or professional sports, you could lose your job at any minute. So I figured at a Division II level, I could have this job for the rest of my life. And, it's been nothing but great so far. I've been there for a little bit over a month, and I feel like I haven't worked a day. So it's been absolutely tremendous and a tremendous honor.
Yes.
It's awesome.
So I would love to I have so many questions already, and I would love to kind of take this in chronological order. I feel like that would make the most sense. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
So I'll start it off. So you said that your first game of organized sports was a freshman in high school?
Yeah, that's
so
right.
That is obviously an outlier in any sort of sport. I don't care what it is, particularly football. First of all, what position did you play?
So played both sides, offense and defense, as a offensive tackle and a defensive tackle / defensive end.
So, I mean, that's just incredible, like how you were able to do that. First of all, what made you decide to jump into football your freshman year of high school?
So this is actually kind of funny. So all of my friends in the neighborhood grew up playing, in the youth leagues, and I was always too heavy to play. I I was probably over 200 pounds in middle school, and I think there was a weight limit of like 185 or something like that. And I just never had the opportunity to play. And if I did, I would have had to have played against like the eighth or ninth graders as a sixth grader, which honestly, at that age, would be unfair no matter how big you are. So, um, as soon as I got the opportunity to play freshman year of high school, I had to jump on it. And I was playing a ton of football, like just backyard and all that stuff. So I can't say it was an extremely easy transition, but it was one that I was really ready for and one that I was super excited for.
Any like particular memories that like really stand out to you that you can kind of reflect on, like how hard you had to work to make such a quick transition? So the three of us are all ex Division One athletes, and I remember like when I was in middle school, like a memory that sticks out to me was whenever I had a bad game, I would go home and literally run sprints. I turn on the outside light, like my mom would say, go take a fucking shower and get ready for dinner, and I'm like, nah, I'm running sprints. I played like shit. Like, do you have any of those like memories?
I actually recall the first conditioning session that we had going into high school. So we weren't even truly high schoolers yet, but it was the fall camp leading up to freshman year of high school. And it was the first conditioning session I had ever done. And the whole session just consisted of the general movements that you would do in a dynamic warm up, except they were stretched the entire length of a football field. So it would be like, it wasn't the smartest thing I've ever seen, but it worked nonetheless. But we would do like high knees for 100 yards and recover. We would do karaoke's for 100 yards and recover. And
Jesus.
it was awful. And I remember coming home that night and sitting in a tub of Epsom salt for probably 2.5 hours. And I said to myself, I have to do this again tomorrow. And it's those things where at the time you say to yourself, is this really for me? But you wake up the next day, the sun comes up, and you say to yourself, okay, let me just make this session. And you do it. And it's still going to be hard. You're still going to be sore, but you continue to put those things together in those days and those weeks. And all of a sudden now you're in a lot better shape. Your confidence is through the roof. You're not sitting in a tub of Epsom salt for 2.5 hours. And you say, maybe this is for me now.
Love that. What about you, Drew? Any of those memories in middle school, high school?
I have many of those memories in middle school and high school. I mean, mine was similar to you, Pete. I mean, I was pretty good as an athlete, but there were days like my main thing was pitching when I was really young. And I remember specifically, it was the first year I made the team to play in Little League. And I pitched in the finals in like the World Series. And I was out there. I remember my arm was hanging. Like I always had arm problems, but I threw like a high pitch. It was like bases loaded. We were up, like about to win. Kid just cranks a grand slam. We lost. Like literally. And I remember being in the car and I was like, Mom, I'm literally never playing baseball again. Like I'm done. And then, come next year, I got injured, and after getting injured, I broke my collarbone. I came back in the playoffs, and we ended up winning. And I hit 2 home runs to win, and shit like that always just happens. You know what I mean? And it was like, the whole time I was just working out, and I was trying to do stupid things like you guys, running around doing sprints. My dad was trying to teach me how to lift weights. I had no idea what I was doing. I think this is probably why we all are in this, is because when we were playing sports, like I can speak for myself here, but I think a lot of strength coaches, it's pretty similar. We were all doing everything wrong, like early on, and not necessarily like, bad technique, just like a lot of things that we maybe shouldn't have been doing. And that's kind of how I got into this, because I was like the kid who was really good at sports and then lifted weights and then got worse and then got injured and then transitioned sports because I love sports. I guess I would ask you, Paul, like, was it a similar story for you, or based on your background, like what things led you down this path of becoming a strength coach?
I actually have a similar story, just like you, of getting injured. I I built up this huge, strong fortress body that I thought was, quote unquote, impenetrable. And I ended up dislocating my shoulder by getting hit from the side, something that most guys could probably shake off. And I said to myself, how is this possible? How can I dislocate my shoulder against, other guys that are probably 80 to 100 pounds less than me? And I took a step back and I said to myself, well, I know I'm not doing enough back work. I was a huge bench press guy, so extremely anterior, and this was way before I even knew what the word anterior meant, or rear delt, or like anything posterior. So I had to go back to the drawing boards and start working on that stuff, on my own. And going into my senior season of high school, I had already accomplished close to a 400-pound bench. I was squatting probably 500 pounds. And the transition to college, I was actually upset. I said to myself, why do I have to listen to someone else tell me what to do? Well, I've done all this by myself, trial and error. And as soon as I got there, I said to myself, wow, these guys are no joke. They are obviously extremely educated. They practice what they preach. They've put a few people in the NFL, and maybe if I listen to them, I'll get a chance at that too. And I actually began to really trust them. And, we can dig deep into this if you want, but one of those guys is actually a huge mentor to me now. And he still works there, and I still reach out to him almost weekly. And I have a huge respect for college strength and conditioning coaches and any coach in the strength and conditioning industry, because I know it's not easy. And if you want to stay in this profession for a long time, you have to continue your education. So, that's kind of my story getting into it.
I did the same thing. I remember when I went to college and I was like, I have to follow this program. What do you mean? I've been doing this program for so long and I'm unreal at lifting weights and I'm jacked and I'm a great athlete. You know what I mean? Little did I realize I was doing way too much and I ended up just slowing myself down on the field. But yeah, you're right. I think I myself have a ton of respect for any college strength coach, because my philosophy in particular is, that everyone's really different. So I think it's super challenging to manage that many athletes at one time. And so, Pete, you might have a question, but this would be my next question would be, Paul, how do you manage, like, because Pete and I are not college strength coaches, like, we work with teams sometimes, but how do you manage like one program for a ton of different athletes? And are you trying to individualize things at all? Is it something that you're balancing out between like being super like, chalkboard workout, one workout for everyone, and individualized, or how do you approach that?
So I think this point in time would probably be the least specificity that I've ever seen across the board. And the reason for that is because I took this position about a third of the way into the semester. So now I'm not looking at sports performance per se for that semester. What I'm looking for is complete understanding of all the terminology, the movement patterns that I want for the summer program, which is going to be the longest point in time that I don't see them. So for me right now, it's kind of like a block zero for the entire athletic department, and there are some differences. Obviously, we take a look at the prevalent, common injuries amongst that specific population, and we address those things. But for the most part, everyone's doing a lot of basic barbell movements that I know they're going to be extremely competent at when they go home for the summer. This way that we can hit the ground running in the fall, and then we can incorporate more specificity with that stuff. But going back to the first half of your question, organization, that's been a lot easier to manage than I expected, because we actually, and this is stuff that I'm gathering, we lost a lot of guys and other female athletes through the transfer portal. They actually left as soon as COVID hit because for one reason or another, their season may have gotten canceled and another school may have been playing, so they left. So right now I'm actually working with about 200 athletes opposed to what it was prior, which was about 290 athletes. So it's still quite a few athletes for one person to be in charge of, but my preparation skills has definitely set me apart from others that haven't been fortunate enough to get to this point, because every time a team comes in the lift, I know that I'm prepared for that lift. And sometimes it's on a daily basis, especially for those spring sports, because things are changing all the time. Games are getting rained out. There might be a COVID case that shuts down a team for 2 weeks. You never know. But on a daily level, preparation is huge. And then we can start to expand a little bit more into the macro cycle view, which I haven't really been able to dig deep into yet. Developing an annual plan, which is something that I really want to do, but right now there's just too many moving factors, and there's too many incompetencies amongst the entire group of athletes to really hone in an annual plan that is going to set the ground rules and the groundwork for the future.
Have you guys ever actually completed a macro cycle, like to the T with everything that you've written down? Like, I don't think I've ever once done that. Like,
No.
there's always something that has to change. You know what I mean? Like, so, I mean,
Or you get bored.
right. Well, that's a whole nother animal. But like, I feel like there's just daily changes that have to be made. So I actually I like that answer. I think it makes sense, Paul.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
With sports, and again, we all three of us were high level athletes, and especially in a Division I atmosphere, the mindset for coaches is what have you done for me lately, right? And it just kind of goes to show how cutthroat this industry is, because as coaches, we kind of do the same thing, right? When if I know when I coach my high school kids, you could have a great day yesterday, but if you're coming in here and you're not focused and you're chatting and it's what are we doing? Do you want to be here or do you want to leave? You tell me. But I guess what I'm trying to drive at here is it takes so much discipline to stay engaged in this field, because it is cutthroat. It's super competitive. So, talk to us about what kind of reading and research you were able to do while you were out of the field, and what, because this podcast is really aimed towards young strength and conditioning coaches, young sports performance physical therapists. What kind of advice would you give to someone that was in your position where, you did the dirty work for years and, you have a few obstacles to overcome? How do you get through that? What were you telling yourself on a daily basis, and what practices did you follow to stay, no pun intended, in the game?
Yeah. So during quarantine, one of the things that I did was I picked up probably, I want to say at least 3, as many as 5 or 6 books, all based around discipline and leadership and mindset style books. And the reason for that is the science books will always be there. And that's something that you should always refer to, in terms of, gross anatomy and exercise science, bioenergetics. That stuff doesn't change. But in the role that I'm in, you are a leader, whether you like it or not.
100%.
You are going to influence people on a daily basis, either positively or negatively. So one of my favorite books is actually almost like an animated book. It's super easy to read, and you may have even read it too. It's called The Energy Bus, but it's a quick read. It's about 150 pages or less. And all it talks about is you're either bringing energy to a group of people, or you are an energy vampire, which means that you are sucking the life out of that group of people. And in the role that I'm in, if I have a bad day, that whole room has a bad day. And I won't allow myself to. Every single day that I'm in that room, whether I'm actually having a good day or not, they'll have no idea, because I can't let myself affect the rest of the group. And I try to convey that message to them as well, especially if I get the opportunity to. I'll pull someone that's visibly upset and I'll say, hey, like, what's going on? It's evident that something's upsetting you. And, we'll talk about it. And I just said, you know what, do your best for the rest of the session to try and smile, or at least try to put yourself in a better mood. It's easier said than done, but I promise you, by the end of that session, you'll at least feel better. And if I can reconnect with that athlete again, I'll say, do you think I always have a good day? And that athlete most of the time will say, well, it looks like you do. And I said, that's the thing. If you can make it look like you are having a good time, chances are your mood and everything will change dramatically.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think discipline is so important. I think all of us, when we initially got into this field, we understood that you have to do the dog shit work for a while. You have to do the internships for free. You have to dedicate your time. You have to study out on your own. And we've talked about this before, Paul, but like, I respect you so much for staying with it. We first got to know each other pretty closely kind of when you were in that transition period. So I'm just super proud, man. Congrats.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Pete.
Hey, I want to jump on that. I love what you said about making sure that, like, if you're not in a great mood, it doesn't come across that way to your athletes. I think that is super important as a coach, especially as a college strength coach, because I feel like a lot of my experiences with college strength coaches is, and I don't mean this as an insult at all, because I was trying to be one for a little bit, is that a lot of them are kind of egotistical, and they come across as like, hothead is what I would say. And there are guys, I think, that, it seems as if they are having a bad day with their coaching style. Now, how do you manage that? Because, like, my experiences with college strength coaches are like, they're kind of just trying to make sure that everyone is putting the right clips on the bar and organizing their plates, like with 45s and 25s and 10s and everything in the right spot. Like, how do you balance those things? And if there's a circumstance where you feel like an athlete is maybe more of the anxious type, and you're a little bit more, you're bigger, you got a big beard, you're muscle bound, you're like, we're all like this, I think. How do you approach those situations?
So, Drew, just correct me if I'm wrong. Are you asking, how do I get the athletes to always show up with, the right mentality, the right attitude to execute? Or
yeah, what are some strategies that you use for buy-in, and what are some strategies that you use when you feel like maybe some are bought in and others are not, and how do you manage those different personality types?
So my first week at the University of Bridgeport, I sat down kind of like circle Indian style with every single team before they ever did any type of exercise in that room. And I laid down some very clear expectations and ground rules that I think are really important, regardless of whether you're a strength coach or a CEO or, running your own business out of your garage. It's important that whoever is under you needs to understand what the expectations are. And once we did that, I told them something that I think resonated with them very quickly was, I'm going to be the best coach you've ever had, but I'm also going to be the most difficult coach you've ever had. And the reasoning for that is because I'm going to be your best friend. I'm going to be the person that you can always come to talk to. I'm going to be the person that you can come shoot the shit with, in between your classes. If you want to come down, have a seat in my office, shoot the shit, I'm all for it. And however, every single mistake that you make in that room, I'm going to call you out for it. And I told them, you don't have a lot of friends that will do that. A lot of friends nowadays say that they're your friend, but they don't necessarily hold you to the highest standards. And that is what's lacking, I think, in some of the younger generation kids, is they can't take constructive criticism, even if it's positive, because they're not used to it outside of specifically a college weight room and athletics as a whole, is they don't see it anywhere else. No one else is holding them accountable for their actions. So I might get on a kid, I might bark at him a little bit, and then 2 seconds later, I might fist bump them for like a great squat or a really explosive movement. I'm like, wow, I didn't think you had that in you. That looked awesome. And then they kind of like scratch their head and they're like, aren't you pissed at me? I was like, no, I don't care. I might have been kind of upset with the way you acted for that split second, but we're good now. Yeah. So I think the culture takes care of itself if you take care of those little details. Like, I don't let anything slip. And, going back to the 45s being organized and the clips on the bar, I will hound people for that, because it is those little attention to detail things that oftentimes lead to bigger flaws and gaps in discipline down the road that could affect maybe the fourth quarter, 4th and 1 false start, if you're an offensive lineman. So I try to capitalize on those attention to detail things as much as I can.
I like that. I think that's a little thing that can maybe help, like, instead of it being a specific exercise or, designing a drill, it's just those little things that they need to be able to manage, in stressful situations. So, I mean, that makes sense. Are there any specific drills that you use for, I guess, like getting that buy-in? Like, I'm thinking about, stuff going on with someone and they're pissed off, and I'm thinking about like med ball throws. Like, are you making things competitive to drive some of that buy-in, drive some friendly competition? Are there any specific drills you use like, just, I guess this is a selfish question, like, because I'm working with a baseball team right now. Like, are there any drills that you're doing that you feel like you love, and it's maybe more of a new drill that's aimed at driving some of that competitiveness and attention to detail?
What's funny is everyone has their biases towards, what they're going to do as a coach when they get the opportunity to run their own show. And, everyone's like, oh, I'm going to be an Olympic guy, or I'm going to be a velocity-based training guy. And they don't really know what they're going to do until they get put in that situation. And until you're put in that situation, you're on the outside looking in. And for me, I was never a huge med ball guy or trap bar deadlift guy. And right now, I am a huge med ball guy and a huge trap bar deadlift guy. Yeah. And the reason for that is because they are so easy to coach, and they're so easy to implement. And if you were to ask me what my thoughts were on the trap bar, 6 months ago, I would have been like, I'd rather have a straight bar out in front of me. Mm-hmm. And, for the average kid, why? The body doesn't know horizontal push and pull from a stress standpoint. It knows stress. That's really what it knows if you're looking for a strength adaptation. So instead of putting the bar out in front of you, let's put it in a more advantageous position to get this guy moving some weight a little bit quicker.
Yep.
And especially for in-season sports, I'm going to ride that thing as long as I can. And I might play around with some straight bar variations, but I'm not in a rush. But going back to your question about competitions, I haven't been able to utilize a lot of competitions with in-season sports because I'm always looking at, yes, you know,
they're in competition every day. Yeah.
right, exactly. So the off-season sports, those are the ones that they really have to earn a competition for me. And women's soccer last week was actually the first team I've done a competition with. And it was really simple. You know, it incorporated kind of like a move the mountain style 45-pound plate carry with like a little obstacle in between and a med ball toss. But it was competition that they had never seen inside of that weight room before with me. And the reason why I want them to earn it first is because I don't want them to think that, you know, this room is just games.
Yeah.
You know, and women's soccer, I was having a little bit of trouble with them with the buy-in aspect, a lot of goofing around, and, you know, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I was definitely Mr. Hyde with them.
Sure.
And they turned the corner really quickly. And that obviously comes from their head coach too. The women's soccer program won the national championship for Division II in 2018. Their head soccer coach is a boss. And he shut that shit down for me so quick. The next training session that they were in, after, you know, I let them know, like, this is not good. I don't like the direction this is heading in. And, you know, if it continues on this direction, I'm just going to kick them out every time. And he's like, I got you. And they came back in pristine, head to toe, tip top shape. And I commend them with a competition, and they loved it. So,
yep.
You know, it's not always going to be a smooth, easy transition, but, you know, that one in particular was awesome to see.
Yeah. So I can think of like, I'm thinking like in-season stuff, and I've been working with the baseball team, like I said, and one of the competitions I've been using is a ISO lunge, like, and you just got to beat everyone. Like it's literally as long as you can hold an ISO split squat, and you take your shoes off, you put your shoe right beneath your knee, and you got to be 1 inch from the shoe. And if you touch the shoe, you're out. If you get higher than 1 inch, you're out. And so the reason why I like that one is because that's building mental toughness, number one, because you got to dig deep, you know, when your leg's on fire, because you're literally on fire. And if you've ever done this before, but also like, not only that, you know, it's building that camaraderie between the team. And it's also a position that's really safe, I think. And I think isometrics are good too, you know, for recovery in season. So that's something. And Pete, we've talked about like side shuffle mirror drill that we use a lot with athletes. I've even been doing that where like guys can do whatever they want. So like you're mirroring one guy and he could do a spin move and you have to do a spin move, or, you know, he can do a cut, like, or I'm changing the cones without them able to see where the cones are. Those are some cool ones that I've been using. But yeah, no, I love that answer. I think initially technique is number one. But for me, I think it does make sense, like just at the end just to allow them to have a little bit of fun with that. And also like it is technical because it's an ISO lunge, you know what I mean? Like, and some of the things you can say too are like, you know, provide some context with like, usually like I'll use some floor-based exercise at the beginning, and then the contextual cue for that will be like pretend everything's on the floor. So they're keeping their spine stacked essentially. And so I'm like, all right, if you're leaning forward, I'm going to call you out, and I'll just call people out in that case. So that's a cool one.
Now, Drew, with that particular movement, do you see little to no soreness afterwards because it is an isometric, you know, the next day?
Yeah, I think it honestly aids in recovery. And I think it's good because if they're getting a ton of those quick contacts on the field, if it's a field sport, this is like on the opposite end of the spectrum.
Gotcha.
Nice. That was a good little segment. So I kind of wanted to take one or two steps back and talk about working with egos. I know particularly on my team and, you know, our competitions, I suppose, in the weight room, we almost had to have an ego, right? And like when you compete at such a high level, everything is a competition. And you know, if you don't exude that confidence in everything that you do, but your opponent does, then you're likely going to lose. And that's just how it is, you know. So I know, you know, I know for myself, like when I was playing soccer at a collegiate level, and you know, I certainly had an ego because that's just how I played, right? Yeah, the big thing with soccer is it's a saying like look at his swagger, like he plays with swagger, you know what I'm saying? And you're just assessing like his body language, right? um but like, how do you coach and how do you manage egos? Because number one, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but number two, you also need their respect when they're in that controlled chaos environment. So how have you come across that so far, and if so, how have you managed that?
I
And
think
like, you know, you've been to big schools like LSU and Yale, and like, so I'm sure you saw that at LSU. Like, what were some practices that you observed, and how was that managed at literally the top level in the country?
It's an interesting dynamic at a school like LSU because you have these guys that before they even step foot on a professional level are already superstars, and it's really hard for them to even go to class without people wanting to take pictures with them and stuff like that. And I think at that level, you start to see strength coaches act a little bit more in that egotistical sense because they're trying to, there's no control over the ego that those players have. It's like trying to wrestle a bear. Like you're not going to win and you're just going to try your best. So those coaches, they put on a little bit more of that front, and you really do see it at that level. For myself, there's not many players that are going to really beat me in an ego contest. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying like that room is 100% me. You're going to learn a lot from me in that room. And none of you have the tool, are not equipped with the tools yet to even hold a candle in this room with me. So I think from that standpoint, it's a little bit easier for me. But at a school like LSU, those guys have to just absolutely make ass clowns out of themselves and dance around on the sideline with their shirts cut off because there's no other way to get those guys to do what you want them to do unless you are on that level with them.
Sure.
It sucks to say. Yeah.
do you think you can design things that are purposely like not geared towards their strengths if they're like a superstar athlete who has a really strong ego? Like, can you design exercises that are going to make them like build a sense of like, oh shit, I actually can't do this, like, you know what I mean? And then that can kind of knock them down in a way, or how do you approach that?
So I actually had a men's soccer player show up late to a lift, and the rumor before he showed up late was, oh yeah, this, incoming freshman was all state, all this, all that in soccer. And he thought he was the big man on campus, and he showed up late. And, I'd never want to belittle a kid, but I definitely made him do up downs in the weight room while the rest of us were working out. And, you know, I also have different tactics that I could use that are not as physical and they're a little bit more mental, and we can touch on those. But this one, I wanted him to know that he's not a part of this group right now because he didn't do what the rest of the group did, which was show up on time, which is one of the first thing that I need them to do every single day is just show up on time. So
What if I have a question for you, because not everyone's a college strength coach. So like, what if it's a situation where these guys are paying to come see you? So like, would you still approach it that way? Because they don't have to be there. You know what I mean? Like, would you use a different strategy in that case?
That's a super tough question to answer, because that's why the private sector has never been my forte, because I don't want to sell you a product at all. I'm going to give you what you need, not what necessarily what you want. But if you did interject me into that kind of situation, I would say it really has to come down to what you do with that person after the lift or before the lift. The connections that you make with that person. And I can't imagine where, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, because I don't work on a one-to-one personal training basis. I know you guys do in some capacity, but I can't imagine where an ego actually disrupts the training effect of one solo person. But as soon as you start to add one or two more people in that group, it definitely can affect the group. And that's where I think you'd have to have a conversation with that person and say, listen, you are paying me money to be here, but there's 4 other people in this group that are also paying me money, and they're having an issue with you, and I'm gonna, if I need to, I'll get rid of you so I can maintain 4 happy clients.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. So I'm thinking like, you're training a team, you're going into a team, and these guys you're starting a program up, right? And these guys are going to have to pay to be in the program, and you're trying to get them to stay in the program, and you got to manage all these different personalities. And so like, here's an example that I use, which may be helpful here. So I was talking to these guys about an exercise that we were doing. We were measuring med ball throw velocity. And I was explaining why I'm using this as one of my key performance indicators, right? And this one kid I knew has like a trainer, and the head coach of the team is telling me like, hey, this kid is throwing a lot slower. Like he's down like 5 miles per hour in velocity after last season. And this has started ever since he started lifting with this trainer. I can tell he's increasing like upper body muscle tone in the wrong places type of thing. And so I just asked him, I said, hey, you're a pitcher, right? What kind of things are you doing in the weight room that like look like pitching, or what kind of things affect pitching? And he was like, well, we're testing like 10-yard sprints and like 20-yard flying starts. And I'm like, do you do a 20-yard flying start on the mound? And he's like, no. And I'm like, do you see how measuring a med ball velocity throw would be a little bit more specific? And he's like, okay, yeah, I get that. And so now he's coming 3 times a week. And like the other example would be like, with those ISO split squats, like I can guarantee you the best guy on the field is not the one that holds the longest ISO lunge. And so there's these little guys sometimes like that you would look at him and be like, this kid's not good at sports at all. And he holds like a 7-minute ISO lunge, and everyone on the team is like, what's going on right now? You know what I mean? And it's like a little win for that kid. And now every time that kid comes, he's like, hey coach, when are we going to do our split squat competition? You know what I mean? So like I think little things like that can be helpful. But yeah, I think in a college sector, you're right. Like the challenge is maybe not having them show up. It's maybe when they're there, getting that buy-in. It sounds like you're doing an awesome job at that as far as setting the standard from the beginning.
Yeah, that's awesome information, Drew. I'm definitely going to try and incorporate some of that stuff.
Yeah, it's cool. I think the big thing for me this year has been just defining my KPIs with the team, with the sport, with the athlete, and what things that we need to work on, and then telling them what those are and why those are. You know what I mean? Like, and a lot of times too, it can be a situation where I'm like just looking at a vertical jump on a basketball guy, and I'm like, hey, did you see how here, like your knees are extending way before your hips? Like, that's not good. Like, here's why it's not good. And I'll explain that, not for the purposes of today, but like, here's some exercises that are going to improve that, even though this kid's already a really good shooter. You know what I mean? I'm like, hey, like you're going to run into a knee injury. You're not going to be able to get boards. And he's like, holy shit, I'm getting more boards. And you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm not feeling like I used to feel. That kind of thing, I think, can be really helpful too.
I think, something that came to mind, Drew, when you were talking about the pitcher who told his coach about the flying 20s and the 10-yard sprint, was we spend so much time in our little world that we automatically assume that, a med ball toss is immediately going to resonate mentally with that player. that this is a sport specific move, so to speak. And in actuality, he had no idea that that was one of your KPIs, so to speak.
Right.
So it's always important for them to understand the why.
Yeah, that's huge. I think that's a huge way to get buy-in, especially with a lot of the egos is, hey, we're doing this drill. This is why we're doing this drill. I'm seeing a lot of you guys having this problem. Here's why we're doing this to fix it.
Nice. Drew, I know we've talked about this in the past because I feel like we've had similar college strength and conditioning experiences, where for whatever reason we kind of did not get the specificity variable of our sport, in which we kind of left college I'll say a worse athlete than we entered. In the realm of our sport, right? Like maybe we were able to squat more, maybe we were able to move a little bit more weight and develop some better movement patterns with certain things. But in the context of why we were there in the realm of sports, we kind of took a few steps back. And what we talked about was how a lot of that came from the workouts being more tailored to the ideas of competition and discipline and teamwork and that sort of thing. And I'm going to be honest, like when you have 20 kids in front of you, 25, even more with football, it's hard to be specific. You can only look at one or two people at a time, and that's just the way it is. So Paul, like what is your philosophy? Like what is your main objective of your lifts? Like, and there's no wrong answer, of course, but are your lifts tailored to build teamwork and discipline and pure competition, or are they more driven towards like improved sports performance? And not that you can't do both at the same time, but it's kind of like a spectrum, right? And then when you're in the middle, you can only have so much of each.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about like where do you fall in that spectrum? Because I know like at the high school level, I definitely fall more along the lines of, well, I guess it depends, but initially I fell more along the lines of discipline and team building and intrinsic motivation and work ethic, right? And then once those things start to develop, then I found myself creeping towards the other side of the spectrum.
Mhm.
What is kind of your philosophy on that, and how did you get there?
I would definitely say at this point in time, I am more towards the side of the discipline and the hard work. And the only reason for that is because I need to set both the athletes up for success in the room and myself for success. And, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but if the room is just, I don't want to say games, because obviously an ISO lunge hold for max time is not easy, but those kind of competition based things where I'm not truly holding them accountable, it may not help get this in the right direction that I need it to go in, but it's not going to be like that forever. And I would say I need to dedicate one solid semester to it so that we can touch on it briefly in the fall when they return back to campus. And then we're hitting the ground running, and we don't need to focus so much on the accountability things, because I'm not looking for, the last rack in the corner if there's a clip on the bar. I know it's going to be there. That kid doesn't want, he doesn't want to let me down by not putting that clip on the bar or putting the weights back properly. But to go back a little bit further into your original question, and how you and Drew kind of left college taking a few steps back, I think it's a little bit in our title as professionals, as strength and conditioning coaches. I'm trying to get them stronger at this point in time right now. And strength is not the end all be all, but for my population of athletes, I got a few athletes that struggle squatting the bar. And I tell their head coaches, like, listen, I'm not trying to achieve any type of super saiyan strength here. I need, your ladies or your guys to be competent squatting a decent amount of weight. And trust me, without ever having picked up a lacrosse stick or, a baseball bat or a softball bat, you will receive better athletes. Their proprioception is going to increase, their agility is going to increase without ever having stepped foot on the softball field or the soccer pitch. They just became more explosive. And eventually in time, we'll transition a little bit more away from the strength side to some more specific things that maybe we can touch on. But for right now, we're trying to build strength. And looking back at my own experiences in college, I think I too took a couple steps back graduating, because it can't always be about just pure strength. Because we had guys that were squatting 700 pounds and getting injured in week 2. Like, it doesn't necessarily correlate with your resiliency and your durability. And that's why we don't go to Westside Barbell and recruit their guys to come play Division I sports, because that's so highly specified. That's a sport for them. Just like we need to be able to prepare for our sport too. So we can't put all of our cards towards just having a massive squat or a massive deadlift.
Yeah, I think each position, whether you coach in the private sector or at, a high school or collegiate level, it requires a different skill set, and it also requires like a different mentality of how you approach it. And obviously we always want our athletes to be safe, and we always want, everything to look perfect and everything to be textbook, but I think it's safe to say that's not guaranteed. And you can't guarantee that. You just can't.
Yeah.
Like there's so many different individual differences that when you have 20 people in front of you, it would literally take you a year at least to make sure that you sift through each individual, their specific anatomy, their specific strengths and weaknesses, and then program based off of that. You spend your whole day programming.
Right.
Well, do you think that if you just had like a couple things written down at the beginning, if you said, okay, for this position, he needs to be good at X, Y, and Z. And then you just said, okay, after 4 weeks, did he get better at or worse at X, Y, and Z? Or you had a few things for health, you know what I mean? Like, so maybe that's performance KPIs. And then you have a few things for health, and maybe that's a situation. This is a question I had earlier too, Paul. Maybe that's a situation with the ATs. Like, do you have a good line of communication with them? What's the system like there, I guess, is my question on that.
One of the first questions they asked me during the interview process for Bridgeport was, what's your thought process, in regards to athletic training? What has your history been with athletic training? And, I told them that strength and conditioning coaches generally don't make good athletic trainers, and athletic trainers generally don't make good strength and conditioning coaches. So if a guy is complaining about his back, I'm sending him to the training room, because I'm not going to just stick him on the belt squat, or which we don't have, which would be awesome if we did have something like that.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to try and modify around.
So what about like long term though? Like what happens after that? Like, so you send him to the AT, and then what they do whatever with the back. Are they coming back to you and saying like, here's some things that you should work on with this guy, and this is what I noticed, and it's not your fault if they're not, you know what I mean? But what happens after that?
So I've been able to sit down with athletic trainers, and they'll kind of share with me, like, on the smaller scale, what they've been doing for rehab purposes in that room.
Mm-hmm.
And then essentially they'll give me that athlete's limitations in the weight room regarding a barbell, or any type of load, because that's obviously what we're working with in the weight room. So they respect my judgment to not just go load this dude up with 200 or 300 pounds on squat after they said that, we're limiting him to body weight only. So there's obviously a lot of trust and respect that comes with it. And you know, it works both ways too. I want to make sure that that athlete's getting back in my room as fast as possible. And he's not just being left in the athletic training room, you know, doing T's, Y's, and I's on the floor for
Yeah.
the semester, you know.
So let me give like an example here, because this is something that Pete and I have talked about a lot on the podcast. So a lot of times what we're looking at with these athletes who are really high performers is a lot of them have this very anterior orientation. And what happens is, the way that I look at this, just based off of my education, is this guy is probably going to be in a situation where he's more in late propulsion in terms of gait. So he kind of stands on his toes. He's got an anterior tilt in his pelvis, right? And you can see these guys, it almost looks like they're falling forward a lot of times. And this is just an example. This is not like what everyone's going to have, but you know, I am seeing situations in college weight rooms just online, like, okay, like they are using ramps on squats with some guys, which is going to take the foot and the shin bone more back to a late propulsive phase, because now you're in this like heel heavy position versus a toe heavy position. And so in that circumstance, that's like a health exercise. Like you said, like a lot of these athletes can't even squat, you know what I mean? Like that's like a whole health concern to me, you know what I mean? So I think my question is more along the lines, and this is also done wrong, I think too. Like, I think they're like, okay, we're using ramps. Now everyone's going to use a ramp on this today. You know what I mean? And they're literally, every athlete has it. But like, I also feel like that's a good way for you to just micromanage some of these things, especially since you're kind of just starting out, like from a long-term basis, like a long-term standpoint, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I guess it's not really a question. I think it's more of like, something that I think would be valuable if I were to be in your position, but also like, if that does happen, are you able to manipulate those variables? Like, are you able to have the AT say like, hey, we found these things and now you're just going to make a small change with the one guy? Or would you, I guess, would be my question.
So let me ask you this, Drew, just to kind of segue this thing a little bit. Do you have value in things such as a movement screen? Because I deal with such masses that, you know, I can see like an anterior pelvic tilt, and I am working with 25 guys or females at a time, where, you know, it is super hard to critique things. But if I had, you know, something that I could do, and this is something that I wanted to bring to the university, but I didn't have the tools to at the time, but to be able to look at everyone's movements prior to ever having them touch a weight would be something that I wanted to do, but never got the opportunity to.
Yeah, I think it's useful if you're going to use it. Like, that's what I think. You know, I don't think it's useful at all if you're not going to use it. I think it's useful if you're going to layer stuff off of that. Like, okay, you noticed a lot of athletes have an anterior orientation. Let's lay everyone on the ground in a certain position, and let's teach them how to stack their rib cage over their pelvis and explain why you're doing this. Like, okay, this is going to give you more movement variability throughout your joints. We're going to work on how you distribute volume and pressure in terms of inhalation and exhalation. Like, those are things that I think can be easily done. Now, like a thorough movement screen, I don't know how you as one coach would be able to do that on everyone. You know what I mean? Like, I think what you're doing is probably right. Like, you notice like a guy can't squat. I would probably, if I were you, look at toe touches. Like, oh, this guy can't touch his toes. I probably shouldn't do a straight bar deadlift. You know what I mean? Like, we should probably make that a priority before he does a straight bar deadlift. And then other things you can think about are like, okay, he can't touch his toes. Why can't he touch his toes? What's going on here? But I like things like that a lot, because I think you can do it in 5 to 7 minutes, and it also provides context in the long-term scenario with the training process. So now we can say, here's how you stack things, and then I want you to maintain this position as we're doing other activities and standing, half kneeling, etc.
Yeah.
I think realistically, if you're going to do a movement screen, you kind of have to, one, pick one that's not going to take you a lot of time, and that's just going to give you a grand picture, or two, take bits and pieces of different movement screens and tailor them to your lifts. right? Like, so we'll just go off the squat because it's an easy exercise that we can talk about. So before you do your squat day, right, like perform a movement screen that will give you, objectives of the squat, right? Like a body weight overhead squat, or can you touch your toes, or, just stuff like that, right? But like to say that, oh, I'm going to do a full FMS or a full SFMA on every fucking athlete that comes through this door, it's not realistic. And to be honest, like, I don't know if that's necessarily, I don't want to say within your realm because that doesn't sound quite right, but I think you have bigger things to worry about. And Drew, you might disagree with that, but like, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I don't disagree at all. I just had a thought. I think what I would do is I would probably like take a look and say like, okay, this guy's a good squatter. Let's load his squat. He's not a good deadlifter. Let's work on stuff that's going to help him do a toe touch better. You know what I mean? Like and I think a lot of times it's what happens is you get guys who are good deadlifters, you get guys who are good squatters. And I think what you do is you just load the thing that looks good. And then you work on the thing that doesn't look so good without load. You know what I mean? That's probably where I would go. I also love the idea. Like I've been obsessed with isometrics. Like I love the idea of teaching people how to move properly by making them hold the position in the right place. You know what I mean? Like, and so like a lot of times it comes down to like, all right, we're just going to work on things that don't look so good with an isometric. And we're also creating situations where we have more stability so that they learn how to attain some of these positions that they maybe aren't used to being in. And in particular, I'm talking about like trying to get a stacked rib cage and pelvis, so like lying someone on the floor, you have way more stability if you're laying down versus if you're standing. You know what I mean? It's just simple physics. So that's where I would go with that. I think like doing an SFMA is literally impossible unless you had like time outside of the lifts with the athletes to bring them in and do that. I think I would probably try, like if I, with my team that I'm working with, I'm going to do that on everyone, but I'm going to do that on a separate day. Like I did a testing day and I did KPIs. So I printed out a sheet for everyone, and it was broad jump distance. This was for baseball guys. So it was broad jump distance. It was a hide-in for distance, which is just a lateral bound. So like right to left lateral. It was a med ball throw. So for the younger guys, the 9-year-olds, we have a radar gun. It's called pocket radar, and it has to be above 25 to actually read anything. So for the younger guys, I did distance. And then for the older guys, I did velocity on the med ball throws. And I just did a few variations with that. I also did like a torso decel where you have to stick it, which is just working on kind of like that ability to put on the brakes, right? Torso deceleration is just in the research is super important for rotational sport athletes in terms of health and performance. But so like, that's what I would do is I would print out sheets and then have people write them down. And then I would look at them and say, okay, like this kid isn't so good at his broad jump, but he's good at rotation. Like, let's train activities that are going to improve the broad jump. I'm going to look at force velocity profiles. I know that's probably hard, but like for me, I'm going to take separate days to do these things. And it's definitely a different situation because you don't have as much time as I do, probably, Paul. But I think if you just have those things down and then you're using that as your KPI, and then in a couple of weeks, you're like, okay, this got better, this got worse. Why did it get better? Why did it get worse? What kind of things am I doing? And then I also like, and it's baseball, so it's different. I don't know if you're working with baseball, but like if I lie a guy down on the table and he's a pitcher and his arm goes like this, it can't go back any further. I'm like, you're going to get injured 100% if you're throwing, you know what I mean? So that becomes a KPI in that circumstance. If it's the other way around, this becomes a KPI. So to me, and I think it's because I saw so many injuries and I got injured too in working where I worked. Like I feel like I have to do that with my athletes just because I feel like I'm literally doing them a disservice if I don't. And I also feel like with baseball, if I don't look at these things and I don't look at how things are moving, lifting a lot of times doesn't get them better. what lifting does is it gets you better at producing force. Like that's what we know, right? A lot of times that's great for athletes, but it becomes a situation where are you trading some health for performance, and then where do we want to go? I think that scale, I don't know if it was health and performance, but health and performance is one in my head all the time. I'm like, how much do I want to rob this guy of health? Not health, range of motion, I guess. Like,
Sure.
you know, a lot of times it's going to be it's going to be rotation at the hips or et cetera, that you're robbing them of essentially if you're improving force production with some certain means. And so you're like, where do I want to go with this? And how do you balance that? That's kind of what I think about. But baseball in particular, I feel like I have to look at those things.
Yeah, and I think I hate to generalize, but I would be comfortable saying there's probably a lot more intricacies of a sport like baseball versus soccer or basketball.
I mean, it's just, look at the pitchers in the MLB. The best pitchers are not jacked and like, you know what I mean? It's not like they're in the weight room doing the most weight out of any sport for a reason.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at what speed
Right.
is played at, like the game is played at the highest velocity out of really any sport. It's short bursts, you know what I mean, of explosive power, and it's really, really fast rotation. That's what it is in baseball. And so everything in the training process for me is based off of that. And also just energy transfer. Like if I can't transfer energy up the chain into the throwing arm, and a lot of times what we're looking at is, can they do this fast so it can go fast the other way? You know what I mean? So if they don't have enough range, then it's like, you know, their ceiling is right here. They have nowhere to go. So how am I going to be able to do it fast?
Sure.
I got nowhere to go. You know what I mean? So that's where that makes the most sense in my head. I guess that's my thing. I do think there's definitely things you can do, but I think your situation's a lot harder than mine to do it, Paul.
Yeah, I am working with baseball right now, man. Yeah. I mean, I work with every sport, but yeah, baseball is that monster, man. Like in season right now too.
Yep. Yeah.
And I get them a third into the semester. Like I'm literally just trying to keep them on the field and healthy.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's really hard to do that because I was already handed these guys as is. And in a perfect world, I wouldn't have had them play this semester because I had no idea what they had done prior. But right now we're doing decent, and I'm just trying to keep this thing going in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, in season, you do want to do some stuff to maintain strength, I think. So I think you do want to do it. I think you just got to manage the volume, you know.
So I like that we spent, my goal was to spend the majority of our time together talking about the differences between the individual sectors of strength and conditioning. I don't really have any more questions on that particular segment. Drew, do you have any other questions for Paul, or Paul, do you have any questions for us about that specifically, like training the masses versus training individuals?
I mean, if I were to sum up my thoughts on it so far, it would be that you just have to find what's right. I don't think it's like polar opposites, you know.
For sure.
I think you just got to find a healthy mix of it all.
Yeah.
To me personally,
I think at its core, and we said this before earlier on, like we're all trying to achieve the same thing. We're just doing it in a different arena, and we have a lot that we can learn from each other. Like I interned for Future Fitness, Pete Azadorian in Newington. He worked with a lot of hockey guys. That was the most one-on-one time I've ever had with athletes. You know, I would spend the better part of 45 minutes to an hour with one single person. That developed my coaching philosophy and my coaching voice better than any strength and conditioning internship I did in the college arena. So, you know, they all have value, and you need to pick and choose what's best for you.
Yeah. I think on my end to kind of summarize what we talked about, you know, you have the scale where you have to do team building, motivation, discipline, and, you know, accountability on one side, and then you have the actual skill on the other side. And it's a very dynamic meter, right? Where depending on the individuals in the group in front of you, you're either one day you might be tipped on one side, the other day you might be tipped to the other. So, I think that makes your job, Paul, that much more difficult because it's a moving target. Every fucking day it's a moving target, something different. And, the other thing that I wanted to add to that was, how can I say this? You can do both at the same time. And, but does that mean that you're going to get optimal results? Probably not. And I think one of the main objectives that Drew and I have for this podcast is to just start a conversation. We know in this field there's a lot of egos and, there's a lot of like defensiveness and, vulnerability, and it's a tough field to be in. It really is. So I think, like what I'd like to highlight that I think Drew said it before, that's so important, is like, just have a conversation, like if you're unsure about how to approach something, on an individual or specific level, ask someone, right? Like, hey, this guy can't externally rotate at the shoulder more than 10 degrees. Like, what can I do in his lifts to make that better? Right. And vice versa. Like, this team is really having a difficult time staying disciplined for the full hour. Like, what can I do to help that? So I think just for any young coaches out there that, might be on one side of the spectrum or the other, and you're unsure, just have the conversation, right? I think all of our goals are relatively the same. We want to move this field forward, right? We want to do our athletes a service that we probably didn't get. And I think ultimately that's why we're here. I know I didn't get the service that I provide when I was my athlete's age, as obviously you didn't, as obviously Drew did.
I'm looking for my laptop charger. I'm not being a dick right now. I apologize. My laptop might die.
That's true. Real nice. Way to be prepared.
Hey.
As he texted us before, oh yeah, I'm just getting everything set up.
Dude, you know what, man? Give me a break.
It's all right. It's okay.
It's a long thing.
It'd be a hell of a way to conclude this thing. It's just Drew's fucking computer just shutting off.
I know.
I don't have it over there. Hold on.
I guess we'll wait for him. No, I'm gonna ask a question. So, like, you've worked at you've seen so many different levels of competition, where literally the best of the country to the smallest Division I school in the U.S., like literally opposite ends of the spectrum, right? I think a lot of like what us coaches try to do is find the secret sauce, right? Like, what's going to make this team the best? What's going to win us a conference championship? Were there any big things that, like, besides like individual athleticism and like just guys being freaks at LSU, was there any like big rocks that you really took out of each experience and was like, this is what makes a team better, or this is what makes a team worse, this is what inhibits progress? Is there anything that kind of sticks out to you in that realm?
Yeah, I think I'm guilty of this, is trying to copy and mimic everything that I took from LSU to try and apply it to, athletes that don't have that athletic disposition. They're at the University of Bridgeport to get a great education. That's the number one thing. And for me to try and mold them to LSU's strength and conditioning program is not going to get them better athletically. And I think, honestly, in the college strength and conditioning field, we see that too much. Is we see people trying to find LSU's strength and conditioning program or Alabama strength and conditioning program. They do what works best for them. And to say that that is the best program in the country, strength and conditioning wise, is not always accurate. They may have the best athletic program because of the people they bring in.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think the strength and conditioning program necessarily makes or breaks that team. For me, I would say another big thing that I took was
Good.
you have to pick and choose the things that you like from every place that you've worked at. And for me, University of Bridgeport is the culmination of all those places that I've been to wrapped in one. So, I'm not solely an Olympic guy from LSU. I'm not solely a powerlifting guy from Wofford. I am Paul Spada, the strength and conditioning coach that has been to many places that incorporates all these traits into his program that works best with the competency and the athletic ability of those athletes. So I think if you're someone that is young in the field, that is just trying to mimic what he sees on Instagram at the top level, you really need to take a step back and say, is this what is actually best for the athlete that I'm coaching?
One thing that I steal from Drew all the time is being very clear on my KPIs before I sit down and write a program. And it sounds like you kind of do that as well. So I have one more question, and then Drew, if you have any other questions, I want to be cognizant of both of your times. But my last question is, with an ever-evolving field that we're in, how do you plan on staying up to date with research and methods and, I guess not getting caught up in the bullshit and also staying traditional to, the core beliefs and the core philosophies that you use for coaching?
So I have a few techniques that I've been using, and one of the more comical ones is I've been trying to stay away from social media a little bit. And, I'll challenge myself to stay off of Facebook or Instagram for a week, because a lot of times you're brainwashed with a lot of these videos of people doing these erratic things that you say to yourself, man, am I doing everything that I need to be doing right now? And, chances are you probably are, but if you watch that stuff a lot, you're going to be second guessing yourself quite a bit. And number two, always surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. And I'll be the first to admit, I am not always the smartest person in the room. And me being where I am today is just determination and grit. That's really it. Just never giving up. And, I'm thankful to have friends like you, Pete, and you, Drew, because you guys are so knowledgeable at what you do that if there was ever a question that arises that I don't know, I'm not afraid to ask. You have to ask questions, like you said, Pete, because if you don't, and you do have an ego, you're doing a disservice to your athletes, because ultimately you're trying to give them the best possible care and up-to-date stuff as possible. So, if you don't surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, you might as well just pack it in now.
Number one, to our audience, we did not pay Paul to say that, for the record. And number two, there's a saying that I like to live by, where it goes, if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong.
Yeah, it's a good one. That's a profound one.
Right.
Hey, I got a quick something I wanted to talk about, because Paul, you touched on this, and I feel very similar to you with the social media stuff, because I think we do not know a lot. Like, we really don't know a lot. And if you think you know everything, then that's when you're starting to become worse. Like, as soon as you think that you know everything, I think you're getting worse. And that's honestly, like, that's where things get bad, I think, for young coaches. They're like, oh, I went to this course, like, I'm just gonna do this stuff, and that's it. That's what I do for the rest of my career. Or like, they go on social and they find something and they think that's it. And the problem with social for me is, what happens is everyone says, no, you should not do this ever. And that's never how it is. There's always a reason to do something, and you can always justify something. And as long as you can justify it, then you're probably better off than if you couldn't. But it's still gray, and you still don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be, because the body is very complex, and this is a relatively new industry. So I think a lot of times with social, everything is absolute and black and white, when in reality, the human system, the adaptation is like, it's gray. Like, the training process is gray. we're never going to know. And as soon as you think like, oh, it's like consumer bias. It's like if you have a bias, like all of a sudden you're like, I just did something and this guy's 40 time went down and it was all because of me. Like that's when you're doing things wrong. You know what I mean? And the big thing is like what you're saying, Paul, is you got to be a good person first. I think without saying it, I think that's what you're saying, because that's where you are today. And you're affecting athletes in more ways than just giving them the coolest exercise to post online. Like you're affecting them by creating people that are hopefully going to become successful and, have a great time at college and playing their sport. Like, I think that's a big piece of it. And I think that's what we're all talking about here. So if you're a coach, you're not just a technician, you're also a person. And I think developing yourself initially and just understanding, I think you said this too, Paul, like having a voice that is true to yourself. Like don't try to mimic another coach. Like don't look at the best coaches and be an intern somewhere and say, I want to talk exactly like this guy. You know what I mean? Like all of us, I think you said this too, had a bunch of different experiences, and we're blending those experiences together into our approach today. And we're still trying to, at least hopefully, and I, sometimes I'm not the best at this, we're still trying to learn and look at the research and look at other things like books instead of online for resources. And we're talking to our network, right? And here's another quote for you. Your network is your net worth. That's another good one. So all right. If you're a young coach, I mean, it's really a thing. It's hard, dude. Like you go on your IG and you're going to see all this stuff. Like I've made so many mistakes with Instagram. Like I literally will put something up and then like a coach or like an intern that worked under me like a couple years ago will like use this on someone for the totally wrong reason. Like they post it and then they tag me and I'm like, shit, are you kidding me? Like now I know this was my fault that I put this on here and this guy has no idea why I put this on here, even though I described it in the caption, but they didn't understand what I was writing. So I don't know what people are going to understand. So it's tough, but I'm not a college strength coach. So I don't have like as much security. I know there's not a ton of security in college, but it's not like you need to be out there putting out content. You know what I mean? Sometimes I think we have to do that because that's what a lot of these kids are looking at, or whoever you might be trying to train is looking at. What's the first thing that someone does when they get a coach? Paul Spada, right? On Google, So that's another thing you can go wrong on too, is you can put yourself up partying with your friends and then they see that and they're like, oh, this guy's a joke. You know what I mean? That's another thing that we see a lot with interns. I see it all the time. And then an intern has all these videos of him like drinking and being in a frat with his buddies. And then he says in the story, anyone want to buy a program? And I'm like, dude, are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? And so, yeah, like, I think to me, that's my biggest thing is like, be a person first, but then also understand that this stuff is super gray. And so as a technician, you don't know everything. It's not ever going to happen. Unfortunately, I wish I knew everything. So,
yeah. And I think the sad part that I'm seeing a lot of right now in the college realm is plenty of coaches that are coaching behind the lens of their phone for Instagram. And if I'm an athlete, I'm going to be saying to myself, is he coaching me or is he trying to groom his Instagram following? And these are college athletes. They're not stupid. They're, between 18 and 22 years old. You're not going to fool them. And I try to limit, actually, I haven't posted a single video of a training session on my Instagram from University of Bridgeport because I am so dialed into those training sessions. And if I'm making them put their phones away, why would I have my phone out while I'm coaching them?
Yeah, it's a good point. But I will say I've found that there are specific athletes who want that.
Yeah.
Because I've asked them and some of them are like, dude, why have you not put me on your Instagram yet? And I'm like, oh, okay, I can do that for you. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's great for both of us. I didn't realize that, to be honest, at first, because I thought that too. Like I was like, you know, I was like the guy, I was like, I'm never going to post on Instagram, you know, like I'm way too good for this. Like, and I learned very quickly that just not as many people are going to know about you. Like, it's just what it is. It's just like, and if you're a good coach, you're not putting everything up there. You're putting up like a bird's eye view, and then no one's going to see what I actually do. They're not going to see what I actually do. You're going to see like the very, very smallest bit of it. And sometimes I think where I fall into a trap is like, I put up something that maybe doesn't make sense. You know, like it makes sense in my head, but it maybe doesn't like come across the way that I want it to. So it's, I think asking the person, for me, I started asking, and then I realized like, oh, this guy wants this, so I can do this. This helps with his motivation. It may not help with all your athletes though, Paul, you know? So maybe you're not doing a video of everyone. Maybe you're just like, hey, you know, do you want a video here? Like, would anyone want to be in a video? Sometimes a good way to do it too is take videos and then show them their progress. That's what I do too, is I'll like, sometimes I can even get buy-in with that too. Cause I'm like, hey, this was what your vertical jump looked like. Here's what it looks like 4 weeks later. Here's the changes that we made throughout the training process. You know what I mean? Or like, hey, this is what your split squat looks like. And then you don't even know that they're like this, like super bent forward, which I don't want. And I'm like, hey, look, that's where you are. Here's where I want you to be. And they're like, oh, I see. You know what I mean? And then that's a cool thing right there. And you can use that to educate people, I think. So I think sometimes it's valuable, but you're right. It's definitely a double-edged sword.
Yeah, fine line for sure. Any other concluding thoughts, guys? I'm good on my end.
I felt like my last thought was a good concluding thought.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree too. Good job.
Nice.
Thanks. I didn't even mean to be a concluding thought. I didn't know you were going to end this, Pete. It's kind of sad, but it's all right.
Well, I think for our listeners' sake, an hour and a half is probably enough.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think we covered a lot. I think we covered soft skills. We covered programming. We, you know.
Why are they called soft skills, by the way?
Why?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Either of you guys know?
I have no idea.
What is it? Soft skills?
Soft skills, right?
I think he's talking about communication.
Communication, right? Like connecting with people, building trust, building rapport.
Why is that a soft skill, though? Like, that doesn't make me soft.
Dude, I don't know. Do you want me to look it up real quick?
No, it's a joke. It's more so like, I guess I'm not. Yeah, I meant that as a joke. You know?
I'll put it in the group chat when I find out. Okay.
I'm trying to say to our listeners that you're not soft if you want to learn how to communicate with people.
No, I think the soft skills are super important.
Yeah, maybe they're not soft skills.
Well, maybe you should do something about recoining the term.
Catching my vibe over here yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Pain Free Performance Podcast. Paul, thank you so much for your time today. Keep doing your thing, man, and I'm looking forward to coming to visit again. I had a lot of fun last week.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. And Drew, you're more than welcome to come next time. I'd love to have both you guys.
Sounds like a blast. Let's do it. Let's make it happen.